latest in our speaker event. I'm Jeff Myers. I'm the managing editor of Concentrate.
I know we had reserves.
We try to do these about once a month. Our schedule is not always exactly on schedule. But the idea is that we try to bring a topic to our speaker events that we think the community may be interested in. We like to bring in as often as we can outside speakers who might offer us perspectives that we wouldn't otherwise have, and experiences as well. If you have a suggestion for a topic sometime in the future, you are always welcome to email me. My email is jeff@concentratemedia.com. I want to give you a heads up on our next event, actually, before this one gets rolling. It's going to be in 2 weeks, and it'll be here. We'll be here again with Megan Owens, who's the Executive Director of Transportation Riders United. And Megan will be talking about creating better regional transportation options in Southeast Michigan, why we should care what's going on in Metro Detroit, how Washington County might integrate or even benefit from a more regional approach to transit. So I hope you'll join us for that in 2 weeks. Just as a heads up, Concentrate's speaker series is sponsored by the Michigan State Housing and Development Authority. And we also like to give a big thanks to Connor O'Neill's for generously providing us with this space that we all kind of compact into. So today's event is the final part of our Great Places speaker series. It's where we partnered with the Ann Arbor's DDA to broaden the conversation about what makes a great downtown. While these community discussions are connected to are connected thematically to the Connecting William Street project, the idea is to present bigger themes and ideas for our city to consider. We're not here to address any specific issue or policy or agenda, but we're instead here to explore topics with the community that we think are relevant to the planning process from kind of a macro perspective. Think of this as a big picture approach, an attempt to kind of educate ourselves about perspectives and practices that we may not readily be aware of. Over the last few events, we've tackled what makes for a great downtown experience and how do you appeal to a variety of demographics. We did an event on what makes a great public space and what are the challenges to developing and sustaining such a space. And our last one was what makes a downtown attractive to employers and the talent they seek to employ. Today, we're here to add 2 last topics to the series. The first is, how do we create a development-ready community that protects the city's values, understands the developers' motivations, accounts for an evolution in tastes and in priorities, and most importantly, gets positive results? In other words, how do you find the right balance of responding to the needs of today, keeping what's best of the past, and planning actually for the future? The second part of our event is a panel discussion with leaders of some of Ann Arbor's most respected cultural institutions about how the plans for downtown's future impacts the vitality of their organizations. What is their experience running an institution in downtown? How does it serve them? How could it serve them better? How do we allow fledgling cultural assets to take root and grow? I'm hoping that both discussions will provide you with plenty of food for thought. I'd like to kick off the first part of our program with a pair of quotes. The first one is from most urbanists' hero, Jane Jacobs, and it is, you can't rely on bringing people downtown, you have to put them there. Of course, I'd like to follow it up with the quote from the baseball philosopher Yogi Berra, who said, you've got to be careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. So Melanie Piana is the Deputy Director of the Michigan Suburb Alliance. She lives in Ferndale, where she volunteers for the Downtown Development Authority, is an appointed member of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and in 2009, she was elected to the Ferndale City Council. Melanie earned a bachelor's degree in German and Communications from Albion College, a Master of Urban Planning degree from Wayne State University, and is a certified program management professional. One of her roles at the Suburban Alliance is the leader of the Redevelopment Ready Communities program, which evaluates and certifies cities that integrate transparency, predictability, and efficiency into their daily development practices. It focuses on the best practices and is overseen by a group of land use experts from diverse backgrounds, including county, city, and state officials, academia, urban planners, and developers. Redevelopment Ready Communities helps cities address zoning regulations that may prohibit new types of opportunities, reviews internal procedures, and encourages a more proactive actions that articulate a vision for growth by engaging the community early in the planning process. It's her role in this program that inspired us to invite her to speak here today. So can I get a warm welcome for Melanie Piana?
Thank you for inviting me back. I'm really honored to talk again, sort of on the other side of redevelopment ready. So you are redevelopment ready, and now what? How do you get things moving, and how do you get things built to help advance the growth of your downtown? So I wanted to first tell a little bit about the Suburbs Alliance and sort of my background as we move into this. The Suburbs Alliance, we are a nonprofit located in the city of Ferndale. We've been in existence for 10 years, and we were started by a group of mayors and city managers of inner ring suburbs, and those are the older communities that were established in the 1940s and 50s, and we technically call them inner ring, even though they don't border Detroit. We have about 30 communities that fall under our category of inner ring. And we really are about collaboration, getting cities to think outside the box, work with one another on solving some of our region's biggest challenges. And it requires for cities to think beyond their borders. And we are that group of professionals who are trying to do that. And I just wanted to go over some of our guiding principles because you're going to see them throughout this presentation today. We have metropolitan interdependence, that people need to be participating in their government to make this change, that cities cannot do this on their own, neither can city councils, that we need to take some risks in order to get over some of the changes, the humps that are keeping us from our region to having true prosperity. We need to look at the systems and root causes of the challenges that we're facing together. And we always are about leadership and innovation, and that we have strength and partnership. And the Suburbs Alliance is all about having fun, so we try to do that as much as possible with some of these deep issues that we work around every day. So setting that up, I wanted to go through a little bit about my background because I think it's really important about the perspective I bring today, because I've worn so many different types of shoes over the last 8 years that give me a different perspective on the view of development. And I first started off as a resident who was just learning getting their graduate degree in urban planning, and I knew some changes were happening in our downtown in Ferndale where I lived. This was before I was involved in politics. And I wanted to be a part of it because I didn't know exactly the direction it was going, but I liked the direction it was going. And I wanted to be a part of it. So I volunteered on our Downtown Development Authority, and I encourage everybody to volunteer with a faction of their local government. And that's where I started getting involved on specific projects. And how do they get started? What are some of the challenges of moving them forward through the system? What are the concerns of the residents and the business owners? And that really gives you a deep insight onto why things move forward and why they don't. And of course, I have my degree in urban planning, so I'm really interested in land use and zoning and all the nerdiness that comes with that. I am now on the city council. So in 2009, I ran for city council. And interestingly, all the things that I pushed for in my job as a planner and economic development person helping cities grow, I'm now faced with the difficult challenge of making those decisions. Where once I thought this was easy to do as a resident, as a DDA volunteer, as an urban planner, are now hard for me to make because there are so many interests I need to balance as an elected official. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And now also, because I'm on City Council, we have to have an appointee on City Council to the Planning Commission. So now I'm also responsible for figuring out how we're going to grow and making sure those regulations are in place so that growth can happen. And my role at the Suburb Alliance through Redevelopment Ready Communities, which is now becoming a statewide program. In the last year that I've been here, the Suburb Alliance sold it over to the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and they're taking the program statewide. And really what the program was designed to do was help cities become development ready and entering suburbs. And now they're taking it to villages and townships across the state of Michigan. Because every city is dealing with how they grew in the last 50 years is not the way to keep people here. That they want to keep talent, talent that is choosing, young professionals who are choosing to leave Michigan for elsewhere because they don't have the type of amenities that they want in their communities that they love. So, with that kind of background, let me go into some general differences that I think that I've been representing for the entering suburbs that I see that are a little bit different from Ann Arbor. We share a lot of commonalities, but the differences where we are in terms of attracting new development are a little bit different. And I wanted to point them out. So the entering communities that I'm talking about are the Hazel Parks, are the Ecorse, the River Rouges, the Lincoln Parks, East Point, Roseville, South Oakland County, South Macomb County, and most of Wayne County. These communities, as our cities and managers who started the organization said, we've been overlooked. There's a donut hole that the city of Detroit gets resources, and then the development has spread outward, and that these older communities have been abandoned and left behind as these new growth areas have sprung up. And so what you have over time is that the amenities and the structure that made that community great, they're now struggling, and they're now distressed, financially distressed communities. That they're losing tax base due to their property value decline. And then one of the only ways that they can increase their property values is through development. And so our cities have tried very hard to become development ready, to become better attractors of development and making it easier for developers to actually get things done in their community. That's Ann Arbor's competition. Our cities are trying to create a unique sense of place. Some of our cities don't have a downtown, and they have what we call drivable corridors, and they're not walkable. And our cities are actively creating visions for their community that create the walkable, high-density, mixed-use development that Ann Arbor already has. They also want to make sure that they're having higher density buildings that offer affordable housing and different types of housing, workforce housing, for their students, for their dentists, for their firefighters, for their police, so that they can still live in the community in which they serve. And the biggest one, I think, because Ann Arbor is a champion of transit in Michigan, as well as Grand Rapids is catching up, is that our communities want better transit and can't get it. They're working really hard. They know that transit is going to drive development. And so you guys already have transit, which is driving development. And Ann Arbor has developers who want to actively invest here. They are coming here. Whereas these other communities have to be banging on the door, say, come here and here's why. It's a very different approach, I think, that the entering communities have with Ann Arbor. So those are some of the differences. But I just wanted to go over some of the commonalities, the high-level ones, the macro ones that Jeff was talking about today. No matter where you are in the development process, whether you're an entering suburb trying to change a drivable quarter-wide area into a walkable place with higher density, the development process is the same. Every community has to go through it, and it has the same issues. And so, high level, every city has to have a vision, every city has to have a plan. You have to engage the public business owners in making that decision so everybody has buy-in. You have to get an agreement. Just because you engage doesn't mean you have an agreement. And then you have to have a decision. And that decision is usually made by the Planning Commission with the site plan review and or the City Council. And then of course you build it. Major concept of redevelopment ready is make it easy to build what the community wants. And I always tell people don't want development happen to them. Don't do development to them. And this is where cities need to learn how to do better public engagement practices so that they're understanding the interests, the concerns, the challenges in a more dynamic way than before. And just public forums required by law are no longer sufficient. And that's where I talk about the traditional ways and the new ways. The traditional ways, public forums. The new ways are online engagement, having people come out and speak in a group hub. These are the things that cities need to be doing differently. And they can't do it alone. And then the best one, politics can derail good projects. Everybody has seen it happen, and who loses? The community does, when good projects get derailed by politics. And development is hard no matter where you are, in any city in the United States. It can be really, really difficult, it can be hard, and it's less hard. Because you need to coordinate, collaborate, understand the concerns and interests of so many different people to make a project go. So now I wanted to go over, I've been asked to share a couple stories about what communities have done in order to demonstrate how they're dealing with change, how they're dealing with the public perception, how they've changed the public outreach in order to get a better outcome, not only for the businesses and residents, but also for the development that will help increase the city's tax base and rejuvenate the downtown. And my favorite place is Hamtramck. Has anybody not been to Hamtramck? Okay. So this is Hamtramck. This is their downtown, Josie's Campo, and this is called Shoppers World, and it's been there, I don't know what, for about 30 years, and you can see it's a general single-use building, and in the back is a major parking lot. And I'm going to talk about before and afters, like weight loss. So this is the before picture, and what was happening that stalled this project. This project came to fruition of redeveloping Shopper World almost 4 years ago, and it stalled and it just got delayed. So some of the things that relate to being redevelopment ready and engaging the public. Their master plan was outdated. It hadn't been updated over 20, 30 years. It had no vision for the downtown. It lacked community support for the type of development that the city knew was going to rejuvenate the downtown. And then they got a developer interested in coming down, and he proposed a mixed-use, I think 6-story building with senior apartment living on top, because Hamtramck has an aging population who no longer want to take care of a home, and they didn't want to lose them out of their community. And below was going to be a grocery store, and in the back, the parking lot, 75% of it was going to be dedicated to that grocery store. And what do you think happened? Everybody came out against it, including the business owners, the long-term business owners who knew that the health of their downtown needed to change, and they wanted Shoppers World to be different. But a couple things happened. They realized that Hamtramck has a severe parking issue. Taking away their public parking spaces was going to hurt other businesses. And then people didn't understand why they needed different types of housing, that the single-family home was no longer giving the type of housing that people wanted to stay there. The students who go to U of E Mercy, who go to Wayne State, they wanted apartment buildings. So, let me show you the after. Okay, it's a rendering. It hasn't been built yet. But this is what everybody has agreed on, and here's the developer's rendering that they're going to build. And they have complete buy-in and support. So, what is the after situation? The after situation is that the city updated its master plan and completely did a 180 on how they engaged the public with their master plan. The city of Hamtramck, there's 26 languages spoken in Hamtramck, and a lot of the immigrants who live there don't understand government processes. So getting them to come to public meetings to talk about how they should change their downtown and community, they did something really unique, and I don't have a link here, but I can send it out later. Their consulting firm who helped them created this interactive map where you could put a bubble and a comment, what you wanted changed on an intersection in a corner or a parcel of property. If you didn't want to come to the public forum, you could still have your voice heard about what should happen there. Now, not everybody, this was the master plan. They weren't solving the problem. They were just listening and gathering what they needed to do. So they had outreach meetings, over 10 over the course of a year. They had a master plan committee comprised of city stakeholders, businesses, and residents who led the master planning process. They also had site plan training that was offered to city councils and the planning commission so that they can make better decisions on that development when it came through for approval. And this is my favorite one, and this is going to be a suggestion that I have for Ann Arbor. I'm not really familiar with all the specific projects, but it's something that the state is going to be encouraging too. And they call them team building meetings. And those team building meetings were around specific parcels. And the team building meetings included the mayor, the city council representatives, residents, property owners, and they had public forums on Shoppers World. Just that site. And the outcome of it was, they actually did a site plan test drive, that's what they called it. And the outcome was buy-in to mixed use and residential. And that residential, whatever, I'm not sure it's really going to be senior housing anymore, but it is going to be for lower income residents so that they can live there. The grocery store is no longer there. Obviously, they're not a tenant, but they're going to have retail at the bottom there. So really what a difference in terms of approaching how do you get buy-in, support, and understanding the concerns of the residents' businesses and getting it done. Unfortunately, this project is stymied by the financial environment, and there's not enough incentives to lower the cost of building this project. And I think that's another part that is missing sometimes from the context of talking about development and changing your downtown is the cost of it. And the costs are always kind of figured out by the professionals because it's so complex with the incentives, the state and federal incentives and grants to lower the cost of that property, because at some point there is no return on investment for the developer and they'll walk away. They're not going to give up, and the developer's not giving up, but they're looking and hunting for more incentives to lower the cost of redeveloping this project. So, that's project number one. I'm going to talk about project number two, because it's close to my heart. And this is the Woodward Corridor. A year and a half, 2 years ago, shortly after I got elected, and I talked about this at my first speaker series, is how do you get cities to collaborate and think about development across borders? So you think it's difficult in your own community, in your own downtown. How do you do it when 5 communities share a major corridor? And this is in process, underway. I don't have really an after for you, but I wanted to tell you how the approach is different. So you can consider some of these as new development projects come into your community. The Woodward Corridor, the upper left one, I took that from a restaurant window. I loved it because the sign says, go down a half mile that way, turn around, come back to cross the road. So you had to go a mile out of your way to go on Woodward, and that's the problem with Woodward. Nobody can cross it safely, and it has no sense of place and identity, and we want transit-oriented development there so that we can increase the number of buildings and higher densities so they're not all single use, which is a majority type of development there. And what we're doing differently is understanding the concerns and issues by the other elected officials and the planning people and the planning commission to say, all right, what will work in your community won't work in mine, so I'm not going to force upon you what my interests are in terms of getting what we need. And this has led to a strong coalition of the Detroit Zoo, the Beaumont Hospital, all the elected officials along the corridor, and now we are doing through a Woodward study how to bring transit past 8 Mile, and that's kicking off for the next 15 months. So these communities are about to have an intense conversation about how they're going to change the design of this corridor, which is going to impact all the businesses and the residents surrounding those businesses, because Woodward is basically a strip of businesses and behind them are houses. So those are some of the tensions that we're going to be dealing with. And we'll be launching into a significant public outreach effort by community, because each community has different needs, concerns, and desires. And then this is sort of what the corridor looks like. The big circles are where the transit stations are going to be, and then there could be smaller ones along the way. And we're looking at how do we connect our communities at these stations when each community has a different regulations in place, and we're trying to come up with one set of regulations for the corridor. So development ready corridor. Can you imagine that? Developer doesn't have to come in and figure out what the regulations are for 6 different cities to do his project along the corridor. So that is our vision, and that is what we're moving towards. And then the final one, I'm going to talk about Ferndale. And I wanted to talk about the tensions that happen with new development, because they're real, and they need to be, because the tensions are real, and everybody who has an interest, whoever has a concern and comes to council and complains, has legitimate reasons why they need to be listened to, and you have to actively compromise to identify how to reach those differences so that there's balance between the businesses and the residents. So the first project is more of a positive one, and the second one is one we're dealing with right now. The consequence of adding new development in the downtown that is changing, that is not used to having outdoor cafes, new restaurants, a lot more people walking on the streets. It's exactly what we wanted, and we're getting it. But now we have a new set of challenges that come with it, and we're actively moving through them. You can't anticipate them all the time, but what you can be is flexible, agile enough, and have the set of values around public engagement in order to solve these, walk through and solve these issues. So what you see here is our first loft project ever in Ferndale, and it was built right before the housing crash in 2008. And these were condos, and now they're all rental units because they couldn't sell them during the housing crash. And we had more affordable single-family homes in our area. All the businesses below are filled with long-term tenants, and people love living above in our lofts, and people want more. Unfortunately, we have the same problem as Hamtramck, that it's hard to find the incentives to lower the cost of developing that project to make a good return on investment. But when this was built, the city had an updated master plan. They did a public outreach forum. They got support from the residents behind the building, because this was a single-use properties with parking lots around it. And behind it are single-family homes. And everybody's living in harmony, and people love that the parking garage is in the back. People can go underneath, and it's quiet for both residents. I think that's the biggest concern is noise, which leads me into the second issue in Ferndale, where we've had to deal with public, try some new public engagement approaches to deal with the tensions that new development has. So Ferndale is at a tipping point. 10 years, 12 years ago, we put a street diet on 9 Mile, meaning we had 4 lanes running down our downtown. We reduced them to 2, and it took 10 years to rejuvenate our vacant property. We had so many vacant businesses, retail businesses, along our 9 Mile, that it took 10 years to get to 4% vacancy, which is unheard of right now in downtown. So we are kind of like, now what? Now what? We've done what we needed to do to get people back into these spaces, but now we're ready to go upward. But one of the consequences of changing our regulations and making development easier for our communities is that we had a restaurant come in. It was our second outdoor patio, and it is a restaurant bar, and it went on, I don't have a photo of it, I'm sorry, it was raining today, and the back patio faces a parking lot, and next, on the other side of it, is a row of homes. So it's the first street coming into the downtown. So the homes that are nearest the parking lot and the back patio have hear a lot of noise coming from the restaurant patio, particularly on game days and at major festivals that happen frequently in the downtown. And what has happened is, this is before I was on council, they did the best that they could in terms of balancing the needs of the business owner who wanted the patio, the residents who wanted a brick wall put on the patio, but it ruined the walkability. I mean, who wants the Great Wall of China in your downtown? Because that's what it was going to look like. And so a year goes by, everybody celebrates this patio, and then they put in outdoor speakers. And there was a noise ordinance, and police had never had to enforce the noise ordinance before, other than, you know, your random party in your neighbor's backyard. And the residents who were near this patio, all of a sudden, this is not what I moved here for. I moved here for something different. And the patio and the restaurant represented where we were going. This is where the city is growing in their downtown. And here we have this new problem of putting in this, allowing this restaurant to come in, which is fabulous. It's transformed that corner of the downtown. But at the same time, we get constant calls from residents. And last year, we formed a noise committee. And I was part of the noise committee. And we had tension in the downtown, and it happened to come out on Facebook. The downtown is supposed to be vibrant and walkable. These are the things that we want. Well, no, this is not what we moved here for. This is not what we want. And really, it's the challenge was, how do we solve the regulations and enforcement so that the residents were happy when a problem occurred. We also had to educate business owners who were uninformed about the noise restrictions laws, because we've never had the cafes coming in, that they never had to actually really know about them. So the DEA came up with an education campaign for all new restaurant owners who came in that had to adhere to the policies that the noise committee worked with to change the ordinance. It took a year because it was so complex, and the noise technology and how do you measure noise is really complicated. It's very technical. And it came down to this vote where half the community said the council doesn't need to do anything, and the other half is shut them down, and that wasn't going to happen. Close off the patio, that wasn't going to happen. So what we did was tackle the regulation, had public input on that, had a lot of council discussion. We had, I rode my bike and knocked on doors to see what people thought about what the issue was, and it turned out it was a small minority, and then I also learned that people were just putting up with it, which is kind of a little unacceptable too. So we did all this information gathering, the DDA did their training, and then we trained Planning Commission through site plan review, new applicants who are coming in to put in a restaurant with an outdoor patio had to follow these new things, had to follow these guidelines in order for the Planning Commission to approve it. So a year-long process to address noise from the great growth of a downtown with outdoor patio to move our community from drivable to walkable and creating a sense of place and identity, and the outcome was this. So I think, sort of to wrap it up, I think in that 20 minutes. So what happens when a city stays the same? It's what my colleagues and I talk about all the time. What happens if this inner suburb doesn't change? What happens if they don't get a new vision soon? What happens is opportunities go elsewhere. New entrepreneurs, new developers, they look for other cities where it's easier to get things done. In the case of entering suburbs, it means further decline. People move out. People move out of your state, people move out of the state of Michigan. And the biggest one, I think, that I personally and professionally, I think, that I've heard in Ann Arbor is the housing pressures. Is that by not changing, you're actually making it more expensive to live here. By not allowing more housing to be built, you're raising the rents because the demand is so high. And that pushes people out. The people who are lower income, it's the students, it's the teachers, it's the firemen. And so I don't know if that's a value that Ann Arbor shares. I know the city is pretty about diversity. And this is my own perceptions, right? I've kind of lived here before. When I met my husband, then boyfriend, he lived above 3 chairs across from Sweetwater's and was able to afford the rent there. As soon as he moved out, it went up by $1,500. So, affordable then, not so affordable now. And that was 8 years ago. No, 10. And then I think the worst case scenario is that you get inappropriate development. So it's hard to get through. There's not agreement from the public, and what was a great development now gets watered down, and the negotiation process with the developer who can provide certain public amenities through the development negotiation. So we'll give you 2 extra stories on your building to help with the return on investment of your property investment, but we would really love you to help out with this pocket park. Will you do that? And that's where I think when you don't have agreement is when the inappropriate development starts to occur. You don't get the best that you could get. You don't get the best that you could have gotten. And who loses? So, to wrap up, shared lessons that I think that I've seen across my experiences working at the Suburb Alliance, that I know that I'm actively dealing with as a city council person in Ferndale, and it's hard. And what I've kind of seen happen in Ann Arbor is that really it's all about active listening and acknowledging people's concerns. You can't dismiss them. You need to acknowledge them and say, yes, I will work with you. Please figure out what we can do to compromise. And it's interest-based problem solving. Shout out to my boss who has trained me on that. So that people aren't entrenched in their positions when it comes to negotiations. And then sort of wrapping it up with the key themes of being redevelopment ready. How do you get unstuck? So you need a community vision. You need to target specific sites with the vision. You need to have a team approach for those sites when they're not moving in the way that you want them to. You need to test new public outreach approaches. The traditional ways aren't enough anymore. And what works for one community may not work for another. Facebook seems to be everybody's favorite free one right now. And you need to work with everybody, not just the key city staff, the planning commission, and the DDA. There needs to be a better outreach to the people behind the property, or local organizations who want to be involved. And then I think what I've seen across our communities, there needs to be political will to stand up for community vision and direction. And it's very easy to derail. It's amazing to me, all of this money and effort and time is spent on creating a community vision, and then a development will come in, and the issues for that specific project are so hard to solve that you get inappropriate development because the political will wouldn't stand up for the development vision. And I think those are really difficult situations to be involved in as a decision maker, as a planning commission, and as a resident. What you need to do is just stick with it and get through it. And it may pause for a year or two. Circumstances change, like a housing crash, and then you come back to it. And then the most important is that development is a long-term process, that it needs to be done in incremental steps. But why cities are doing this is so that the quality of life is better, that they can pay for essential services, that they're bringing new types of experiences into downtown if you've never had them before, like cafes, outdoor cafes. And I just wanted to let you know that that's what I always try to do in my city council role, and it's really hard. I know that's a really sort of basic thing to say, but you have to have the ability to stick with it. And I also know that I don't know everything, and I make sure that I find people who can help make me make better decisions, but I can't do it on my own. City council members can't do it on their own. That's why they're elected by the people and for the people. You're there to help them too. So my call to action for you tonight, in the wrap of this, is get involved and your voice matters. Cities can come up with the master plan visions of changing your downtown, but if you're not there coming out and support projects that drive that vision forward, that you might not get what you want for your community. So go to public meetings, go to city council and say you're supportive of good projects, and call your council person, or Facebook them, or Twitter them, however they want to be connected or contacted. Let them know that you're in support, because it does sway decisions. So this is my contact information. I'm the Suburb Alliance, and if you wanted to contact me via my private stuff, you can. It's my cell phone number as well. So I just wanted to say thank you for listening to me, and I'll be around to answer questions. And I'm glad to invite you back.
I wanted to remind you that two things. There is a sheet here that the DDA would love your feedback on the event. So if you can take time to fill that out. Second, if you have any questions, there are note cards and pencils. If you want to write out questions, particularly for the panel, but also we can mix them in with Melanie. We'll have her come up as well so that we can kind of create answers to questions that you might have. Because we're running just a little behind what I'm going to do with, that's okay. I'm going to introduce our panel participants. Amber, can I bother you to collect any question cards when they come up? Thank you. The second part of our event today is to talk to cultural institutions in Ann Arbor's downtown and get a sense of what is valuable to them. How do they view what's going on with the downtown? What's working for them? What might help them work better? We have three panelists today. The first one is Russ Collins. He's the Executive Director of the Michigan Theater. Russ serves on the Downtown Development Authority's Board of Directors, the Michigan Humanities Council Board of Directors, State Street Area Association Board of Directors, and the Ann Arbor Area Chamber of Commerce. He's also the first person I've ever known to be officially knighted. So I don't know if that means we have to address you differently during the panel. He is knighted by the Republic of Italy. And I'm not going to mangle any Italian, so you can say what that honorific is. If you want to come on up. And the second member of our panel is Josie Parker, who has celebrated her 10th year as the director of the Ann Arbor District Library in May. Josie has served on the boards of the Michigan Library Consortium, the Michigan Library Association, and the Public Library Association. She is also the only person I've ever known who's been on CNN to chase down a criminal. Yes, we have a librarian who can kick ass. Our third panelist is Carla Milarch, and she is the Executive Director of the Performance Network. She's a former member of the National New Play Network, an actress, and a mom. And I was trying to find something, different to say about you. And I found out that you also worked as a receptionist once at Miramax Films. True. Which leads me to ask, is Harvey Weinstein really as bad as everyone says?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he is.
There's always room for gossip here. And then Melanie, if you want to join us, if you're okay. All right, okay. I am going to give you guys the mic. I think my voice carries pretty well. Yeah, okay. If you have questions, please write them down on the cards. I'm going to start with a question, actually, that came from the signers, which is, actually, you know what? I'm going to start with one of my own. Then I'll do that one, just because this one's a little more of a softball. We might as well go from there. The first question I'd ask is, why is it important for your cultural institution to be downtown? Could the Michigan Theater thrive if, say, it were located near Briarwood Mall? Could the Performance Network still be around today if it had originally been built on Stadium Avenue? Why or why not? Anybody want to jump in?
The Michigan Theater is a historic theater located in the downtown. We had no choice.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is, would it still be here today had it not been located in the downtown? Could it have thrived?
Based on the Wayside Theater, I would say no. Downtowns are good places for cultural events. They're gathering places, and people who like cultural events seem to be able to tolerate the downtown experience. There's a lot of people who cannot tolerate or will not tolerate the downtown experience. And there's a lot of people who tolerate it, but they complain. And those people have never been to a real downtown before, I think. But, a cultural organization thrives on community. It thrives on a vital streetscape. And essentially it drives that urban experience. So I think that cultural organizations and downtown are inextricably tied together. If you look at a town like Jackson, Michigan, where they took their cultural facilities and put them at the community college, and their community college is kind of like ours, which is on the fringes of the town in terms of geography and downtown. they've had a great deal of difficulty keeping the vitality of their downtown. It's probably not exclusive to the cultural facilities, but I think those are symptoms of what works and what doesn't work. You know, our friend Mel Drunk here is in an organization that probably would benefit from acres of parking around it because of the kinds of programs that they do. But they help drive the vitality of an urban setting. But I could go on and on and on about
let's
suburban, but I need to shut up.
Well, Performance Network is in kind of an interesting or unique position because I guess it depends on how broadly or loosely you define downtown. We actually used to be in a location that was maybe technically downtown, but didn't feel very downtowny. Who remembers the old network building? You know, it was on the other side of the tracks, and it was under the railroad bridge, and the parking lot was full of holes, and it was kind of scary sometimes to go there. And we would do shows for 6 people sometimes. And we moved downtown, and in the course of the year, we tripled our subscriber base. Arts organizations are a lot like restaurants. It's an experience. You want the whole experience. You want it to be easy, and you want it to be exciting and fun, and you want to feel alive when you go there. And that is, you know, that's what downtown gives you when it's an alive, vital downtown. It just feeds naturally into the performing arts experience.
So maybe, Josie, maybe you can talk for a moment, because being involved with the library actually has the downtown space, but it also has spaces elsewhere. So what dynamics do you see that are different about downtown for the library in comparison to, say, the other branches?
Well, I think it's important to understand why the library there is a library downtown that is the main library. It was the only library for a very long time. When the library was moved from the Huron High School building to what is Pioneer, the community then said, the library stays downtown. The community understood the importance of the library downtown. The library at that time drew people downtown. It was it still does, but it was a very definite amenity downtown. The community grew. The downtown library, even after the work that was done over all those years, could not serve its entire population because the population grew. Therefore, branches developed, and they developed 30 years ago. They're not new. The new ones now are not a new idea here. They've been around. What the downtown library does is it anchors our system. It's such a busy system and such a dynamic community. We need a downtown building to manage the programs and events that go there. Yeah, I think we put out a lot of information about the downtown library. It brings an average in the last 5 years 600,000 visits into those doors. The only other thing in town, the only other thing in town that does that is the football stadium. And before the renovation, we actually outbid the football stadium. That's your public library. So it's what Melanie was talking about. That's not necessarily how it be in any community, but it is how it is in this community. You know, I don't spend too much time thinking about why. I just think about how to do it.
So I have a question that came from the room. What could change in the downtown that would bring more people to cultural? They put originally Europe, but they crossed it out to cultural facilities, I think, in general. Anything?
I think Melanie talked about it, and I agree. There needs to be more housing that has appeal to multiple economic levels. That while there will always be housing in Ann Arbor that's high end, and I don't have a quarrel with that at all, I think we do need housing in Ann Arbor that appeals to what I now know are my children. I used to call them young professionals, and now they're my children. And I want my children to stay here and And frankly, they have said to me, Mama, you can have the acre and the grass and the lawnmower, it is not where we're going. And I understand that. And so they need to be able to afford to be in the downtown. We really don't have that for them. And I think that's something that will bring more people into cultural institutions and the arts community everywhere across downtown, is if we have people who actually live here across economic levels.
I think public art is a great thing to focus on because we want our downtown to be arty. We want it to feel like a place where you go to be invigorated and to see art. And you know, I'd love to see. I mean, I know that we're tremendously committed to public art, but I think it has a really big impact on people seeing the downtown as a place to go to be an arts participant.
Those are both fine, and I agree with Josie that getting people to live downtown is going to increase the amount of patronage of all kinds of businesses downtown. I think that something that the community understands intuitively, but I don't think they understand it intellectually, is that we are not an urban community. We are a suburb. We act like a suburb, we think like a suburb, we're constructed like a suburb. And, you know, 100 and some odd thousand live in the Ann Arbor area, and 95,000 live in a suburban environment, and 5,000 live in an urban environment. So it's suburban thinking, suburban expectations that rule the notion of our downtown to essentially its detriment frequently. So it's very hard to get the kind of community consensus that one would like to create a genuinely vital downtown. The thing that's interesting, I mean, to get we've got a wonderful downtown. We're very, very lucky. But to get the kind of density, to get the kind of growth, we're stuck with the. So anecdotally, I looked up downtowns and suburbs, and if you look at songs connected with the downtown, you think about downtown from 1963. And it's a place that you go that never closes. It's a place that people think that neon lights are pretty, that they love the music of the traffic, that patios having loud music are right on. So noise and bustle and strange people walking on the streets and dark alleys and flashing lights and stars that are completely obliterated because of all of the exciting things that are happening on the facades. These are the things that make downtowns exciting. But it's also the things that scare the bejesus out of people in the suburbs. Because they like it if only people they know are on the streets. They like it if it's very dark at nighttime. They like it if it's very quiet. And so when you say we want this, we want traffic jams, we want parking to be a problem, because the only thing worse than a parking problem is not having a parking problem, because that means nobody's going there. And so we get hung up on this. And so when you look at songs about suburbia, they're all loathing suburbia. You know, Pete Seeger singing about the ticky-tacky little houses, and Russ singing about suburbia as a place where everybody's exactly the same, and it sucks if you're a teenager that way.
Here's another question from the room. looking at the room, do you feel that this is a representative sample of Ann Arbor? If so, really? If not, why is that significant?
I'll start. No, not at all. And that is a problem. I had the pleasure a week ago of sitting down with 12 people who had happened to the same age as my children, and 3 of them were in high school with my children. They are, with the exception of a couple, were born here, went all the way through high school here. A couple of them went to school here. They all left. They all left. And they've all come back. They've come back in their early 30s, some married, a couple with babies. And they've come back to this community because they want to be here. They've lived in some of the cities we all hear about being the places where young people want to go. And they went, and they've come back here. And all I asked them was, tell me what is the same that you want to stay the same, and tell me what you want to see change. And those people, with a couple of exceptions, and I can pick out faces in the back who I know are in that group, not that particular group of that age, are not in this room. And they are the people who are going to spend the next 30 years here probably. And they are the people who need to be having this conversation with them. We, and I'm including myself here, anyone older than I am, and I'm 54, needs to be talking backwards to the people who are going to be living here forward. We've done it, we've had it, we had a chance, we built it, we've caretaken. We need to hand off. And I'm with Russ. That group is telling me, Mama, I don't want the lawnmower. I do not want the yard. Thank you very much. I want a different kind of life. And I need to stand back and not in judgment of that. Because if I want them here with me, near enough to me to get them to mow that grass when I don't have time. And he does, God bless him, and he'll do my snowboard for me too. I need to respect that. That's not their desire. That's not the quality of life they're interested in. But if I don't talk to them, if I don't give them a place somehow, I'm not going to know. And my community will suffer overall if I leave them out of that discussion. So that's fine.
I think it's bouncing off of what Josie said. I think it'd be interesting to hear, Carla, from you, because you're engaged with theater, which and the demographic of who goes to your theater tends to be older.
Well, I was going to say the answer to your question is I don't think it is a representation of Ann Arbor. However, it does look very much like our audience. You know, you all look a lot like our audience. You know, very white and relatively mature.
She means that in a chronological sense.
And it's you know, this is something that we talk about at Performance Network quite a lot, and it is something that is being talked about on a national level by producing theaters. Where are the diverse voices among your artists? Where are the diverse voices among your board members, your audience, your staff? And if they're not there, then why aren't they there? A lot of the times there are assumptions that we make, hidden barriers that we don't even see to diversity. We are in a process right now talking about that at Performance Network. How can we confront ourselves about the issue of diversity? How can we question assumptions that we may have or we may not even know we have to make our organization more welcoming, more open to all of the different voices in our community so that they all can be artistic leaders and be leaders in the community. So.
Of course, this doesn't represent the broad base of the community. If you want to do that, go to the Secretary of State's office and watch the parade of people that go in there to renew their drive. I mean, seriously. I mean, that's where you get a sense of what the community is in terms of the demographic. we all know that it's young people and the broad spectrum of our community that makes our community strong. I tend to be less concerned about cultural facilities having an older audience, and there's a reason for that. One of the reasons is that people tend to reconnect with things they were passionate about in their youth when they get into their 40s and 50s. And that's because when you're in your 20s and 30s, you're trying to figure yourself out. You're trying to figure out what job you're going to have, what your family's going to be like, how to raise your children, and very, very complex things. So a lot of times cultural organizations end up with audiences that are older, but they get, the graying of the audience has been a problem with arts organizations ever since I was in college 100 years ago. And so it's not severe in terms of the cultural organization's viability as long as that cultural organization continues to be viable with their art form and with the dynamics of their community. But we're talking about something different here. We're talking about a political dynamic. We're talking about a community dynamic that needs to be broad-based. And Josie's comments are right on in terms of the kind of dialogue we need in terms of what the future of our community is. How the Performance Network is going to survive, how the Michigan Theater is going to survive is going to be based on audience and philanthropy. And that audience is going to be lodged in people that are 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. The future is obviously something that we're concerned about, so we have youth programs and things like that. But the fact that our audience is older is not an intrinsic problem, but in terms of a community not getting participation up and down the age spectrum across the socioeconomic, racial, and cultural spectrums that are in a community, that would be a problem.
So bouncing off that, my best friend, he attended University of Michigan. He grew up in Birmingham, Michigan. He lives in Seattle. He says that even though he rarely attends theater, it's something that usually maybe a girlfriend drags him to, he never wants to live in, this is a quote from him, he never wants to live in a city that doesn't have an active fringe theater scene. And he sees that, he says this.
Does he send him a check?
Yeah. So what he says is, he sees that the ability of that to succeed as a barometer of a community's ability to seed the ground for something new, the next generation of cultural institutions. And he says, because he intimately knows Michigan, he says he does not see a community that seeds the ground for new things. He sees a community very concerned with keeping what it already has going and maybe cultivating the audiences that will sustain it. But where are the new opportunities? What do you think of that assessment? And is there something that you think we're missing to nurture that dynamic?
I will speak to that. I think he's right and wrong. I do have the opportunity to see everything that's going on just about every week because I write a column for AnnArbor.com called On Stages, and so I list everything that is happening, and I don't even know that I was fully aware of all of the different little theater companies that are producing all over the place. There are theaters producing in the West Park Bandshell. There are theaters producing in the back room of an antique store. There are theaters that are finding these little niches all throughout the community. In a way, fringe theater has got to come out of an impulse that can't be directed by the mainstream.
Although I'd say maybe divorce yourself from the idea of fringe theater. I think he used that example, but it could mean fringe galleries, it could mean fringe performance spaces, music venue, whatever it is. It's where are the opportunities for new things to arise?
I believe that they have to come from the fringe. They can't be generated by someone on a planning commission that's going to say, we need more fringe theater, so here's a seat, and here's a seat, and here's a seat.
But what I'm saying is, what do you see as a dynamic that actually allows that to happen? Is that dynamic here?
Well, I like the idea of mixed use. A lot of people sort of crammed into a place together. When different types of professionals, different types of lifestyles butt up against each other, that's when sort of friction and creativity and innovation tends to happen. I think that high density, lots of different cultural and economic strata living closely together kind of creates some of that tension that you need. And the other thing is space. I mean, to be honest, there's really a space shortage as far as producing theater goes. I mean, people are getting very innovative about where they're producing, but it's difficult.
The question is not appropriately framed to this dynamic. He was talking about Michigan.
Right, although he was referring to Ann Arbor because he knows I live here.
Well, Ann Arbor has a big university that there's a lot of young people that come to. So there's a lot of edgy things that happen in Colorado. And an interesting thing that was part of the Performance Network's anniversary that they recently celebrated was the fact that when it started, it was a fringe theater. Fringe theaters last 10 years, max. And then they have to evolve into a more mature organization. So in this town, there are theater companies, there are artists, there are art galleries that are coming and going all the time. So in terms of the framing of that question, is it happening in Michigan? I think it is. There's a lot of stuff going on in Detroit. Sure. There's a very good documentary called Detroitvia that's coming to the Michigan Theater in September. Check it out.
I guess maybe I can reframe it.
So if you want, if you want a no answer that will make your friend happy,
No.
There needs to be more.
I guess what would create like the next arc or the next performance network?
You've got to go and see it. I mean, I think that's a really big thing is don't fear the art. Don't fear the fringe. Even if it's grungy and even if it's over under the railroad tracks and the parking lot is, full of potholes. Theaters can't exist without an audience. They need somebody to go and see the work. And that's a big part.
My wife is going to die if she can't talk right now.
Sure. We don't want you to die.
I'm always struck about our community, and I see it broadly, Washington County, and all the new innovative things that start and fester and happen here. Festivals, Cinetopia, new theater companies, all of this is happening all the time. Stuff in Ypsilanti, stuff over here, Chelsea, on and on and on, and that are working, and some of them only last 4 years. Some of them continue and mature, like Performance Network does. But we have it going on here. We absolutely have it going on here. And there is no formula. But people come up with new ideas all the time and make them happen. I mean, festivals to me is one of those really cool, innovative, fringy things. The theater having an art house in the community is critical. We have that, and we are so fortunate. So tell your friends, you got it going on. It's happening here.
You got it. Let's see. So. Wow, this is really long. The question is, where is the big elephant cultural institution of the University of Michigan in the big picture vision of Ann Arbor, and how it manages change or redevelopment? How do you see, I guess the question is, when we talk about cultural institutions, obviously the University of Michigan is a gigantic one. You might even say it's a second city inside our city. How does it respond to change? How does that impact, I don't know, you? I'm trying to give some context to the question.
I'll start. I don't think if we ask ourselves honestly, all the people in this room, most of us live here because the University of Michigan's here, frankly.
Amen.
So as far as being the big elephant, I don't think about it that way at all. And this is my 4th college town since 18. And it's the first place I've lived in a college town where the town and the university fought over supremacy in terms of that question, the way this community does. It's so fascinating to me because the assets here are amazing, far greater than any other college town I've ever lived in. But yet it's not. There's no comfort in it, and that is really interesting. That even the question has to come up it's so interesting. And what I can only speak from my side of this question, from the public library side. While I go to UMS productions, while I go to Mendelssohn Theater, I go to lectures at Rackham, I go because I'm comfortable with campus, because I went on that campus as a graduate student. I know campus. There are many people in this community who are not comfortable with campus at all. They don't go to campus. The University of Michigan understands their assets. They understand that they need to deliver them, and sometimes that has to be done someplace besides that campus. They reach out. They reach out to the Michigan Theater. They reach out to the public library for space, and they do many programs there that actually we get all the credit for, but it's their content. I know that happens with you too. So when we started talking about, I'm trying not to go in the wrong direction. The University of Michigan has let us know, the public library know, that our location benefits them greatly because their activities there, and I'm going to use UMS, because Royal Shakespeare comes to town. It's the public library in Ann Arbor where the actors and the producers and the directors come and talk to the public. It's not the Power Center. It's not Rackham. It's the public library because people will come to the public library. For me, it's a share. It's what we do at the public library. We share. That's our whole premise. And so we share. And the university shares back. Without getting too much on a soapbox about this, that question annoys me. So I'm going to end it with that.
I'll get on a soapbox. The cultural life in Ann Arbor would be nowhere without the University of Michigan. It would be zero. They built the cultural infrastructure. They maintain the majority of the cultural infrastructure. They are extremely generous in how they share cultural infrastructures. Most universities will not allow their communities to use their venues. There would be no community concerts in Hill Auditorium. There would be no theatrical productions in Power Center. There would be no community productions in the Mendelssohn Theater. If you think about Summer Festival, if you think about how UMS is in the community, if you think about how community groups are allowed to use university venues, they are extremely generous. They use the public library, they use the Michigan Theater. In fact, until the 1980s, there essentially was no cultural infrastructure. In fact, the soapbox that I'm going to get on is that the taxation in Ann Arbor does not reflect the community values in terms of culture. That we generously fund the library, we generously fund public transportation, we generously fund parks. The city of Ann Arbor and the county of Washtenaw provides zero arts funding, or maybe a few $1,000s. The number one source of governmental funding for the arts around the country is local arts funding. It's not the NEA, it's not the state arts agencies, it's local tax-based funding of the arts. All of the tax-based funding of the arts that happens in Ann Arbor, except for a few $1,000 that goes to the music, or that goes to the Summer Festival and a few other things, comes from the University of Michigan. They heavily subsidize their auditoriums. They heavily subsidize the institutions that produce art in our community. And we don't appreciate that in the way that it needs to be appreciated. They share facilities, they share equipment, they share staffing. Can you imagine the Performance Network without the theater faculty that is involved in almost every single production there? Can you imagine the library without the quality programs that are brought by the university? Can you imagine the Michigan Theater without the Penny Stamps lecture series, which is an amazing thing that happens? So the University of Michigan has taken the responsibility that local governmental units have not had to do, and that's good. They're the tax-based funding and government and those tax dollars can go to other things. But we can't fool ourselves as citizens. The tax-based support of cultural programs do not reflect community values, because we fund every other quality of life thing. Lots of money for schools, thank God for that. Lots of money for parks, thank God for that. Lots of money for the library, thank God for that. Lots of money for public transportation, nothing for the arts. We don't need it in the community, apparently, but it's because of the University of Michigan.
I couldn't agree more. I think that especially UMS, to me, exemplifies and understands the concept of a rising tide raises all ships. They have, since I moved here, continuously reached out to smaller organizations, continuously made their resources available. From the time when they 12 years ago brought in a theater series. They were starting their theater series, and they held a meeting with all of the theaters and the little people in the community and said, hey, what do you think about this? They make their resources available to individual artists, which is wonderful. They are currently doing a program that several of Performance Network artists are participating in. It's a teaching artist program where they're taking resources from the Kennedy Center and basically leveraging them into knowledge for our local artists, so that our local artists can become teaching artists and work in the public school system. And Ken Fisher and the University Musical Society, I mean, they get that they're the big fish in the ecosystem, but they get that the big fish needs all the little fish, not just because they're going to eat them, but because we're all part of this very complex, and everybody's got their place.
And actually, Ken was originally going to be with us, but he suddenly got called away. So.
The other thing that we have to praise is the community for its philanthropic support of the arts. Because there's little tax-based funding, it is the individuals in this community that are both passionate about the arts and attend the arts, and they write checks. So the businesses and individuals make this place work as a cultural facility, and then the university's ambient subsidy. So everybody, the majority of the people in this room are sending checks to cultural organizations, and thank you very much, because the infrastructure would not exist without your support.
So why don't I let you kind of have the pulpit here for kind of the last comment about, if you were going to talk about how you see your venue's interests intersecting with downtown's interests, maybe just offer up, whatever little pearl of wisdom you want to leave us with.
This will be short, I promise. One of the things that's been shocking to me, and also quite gratifying, is that I'm in my 30th year at the Michigan Theater. And when I started, there was a department store across the street called Jacobson's. That was this institution that had been there for decades and decades and decades and decades, and you just assumed it was going to be there forever. Moved to Briarwood, went out of business. Borders went in across the street. That's even better for the Michigan Theater than Jacobson's. It's not quite as good for the neighborhood, but it was great. Borders went out of business. So the Michigan Theater has ended up being that critical business, more powerful than Jacobson's, more powerful than Borders, and who'd have thought it 30 years ago?
I'll follow up on that. I think it's when people say to me that the library's dead, Josie, the internet's killed it. And I heard that 10, 15 years ago about bookstores. The library was here long before there was ever a bookstore. The library's here now without the major bookstore. The library's going to be here long, long into the future, regardless of what the e-book industry does, because the library does more than going books, and always has. So I think that I agree with my friend here. It's about the community and those cultural institutions and what they represent in their community, not just merely their identified function. There's more going on there than that function. What I would do, I liked your map of the Woodward Avenue where you had the big circles for the transit stations. And when I was looking at that, I was thinking about if we took our downtown and we just sort of blotted everything out, and you put circles where your major cultural arts learning institutions are. Where are they? They're right up here at 5th and William. They're down at 4th and Ann, right, Mel? The Hands-On Museum. They are the Performance Network, which is Huron and Main Street. Michigan Theater up on Liberty. One thing you have to know about somebody, when you move somewhere you didn't grow up, you know the street names, and no one who lives there does. So I know where the streets are in town. Then there's the Exhibit Museum, the Kelsey, University Museum of Art, all the big cultural centers on campus, the art train out north of town. If you take a map and you plop it down and you draw those circles, that's your town. It's incredible. They're there. They're always there. They haven't gone anywhere, and things pop up and pop down around them. That's the message. I think that's the cool thing. So your buddy out in Seattle is just enamored with a big city where there's ships around. He needs to come back and take another look. Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about arts institutions and cultural institutions, and I just want to sort of bring focus back a little bit to the fact that cultural and arts institutions are just made up of artists and people and audiences. And so I think it's really important to think about how do we retain artists? How do we retain the creative class, the cultural class, the young innovators, the creative thinkers? And I know that we're very aware of that, but how do we create places for them to live so that they don't have to drive from Ferndale in order to do a show at Performance Network, and how do we make the downtown livable for them? I know that DDA is working on this like crazy, but it's something that arts institutions are only, at least for us, we're a producing organization, so we're a little bit different. We create everything from scratch, and so we have to have the most creative designers, the most creative directors, the most creative actors, and so maintaining and fostering that community of artists who live and work here and who stay here it is critical to our success. Without them, we don't have anything.
Okay, thank you so much. I was going to leave us with one last question, which I have for Melanie. Okay. So we're going to kind of mentally take a step back. Somebody sent this question that they thought it was a great idea to have a task force composed of interested parties for a specific water project, residents, businesses, city government, concerned mainly with revenue. But how do you facilitate a conversation and compromise when you have parties with highly disparate interests?
You set some ground rules. Those are the basics of any good facilitated meeting when you're going to have a hard conversation. And those ground rules are about listening, don't talk over people, and maybe in that project, by listening and what they value, maybe there is a way to reconfigure the dynamics of the project to get what satisfy the interests of the people in that room, right? So if you're like, I don't want a backyard patio, it's going to raise sound. Well, sure, but let's work on how do we configure it so that the business owner can get what they want, the developer who's going to build it can do it in a cost-effective way, and that the residents who are going to be there or who are going to be around that have a say in it. Because when you bring residents in to a development conversation, developers change. They can change what they're, and they have. So if you're not at the table, then you can't help those negotiations going forward. But it really is listening. You can't browbeat someone over with your position. of what you want. I mean, it just, you won't go anywhere.
So is the takeaway the understanding maybe that you have to understand that not everybody's going to get exactly what they want?
Yes, you're not going to always get what you want, and the progress needs to be made, and it will be made at some point. Either you'll get inappropriate development, no development, or
Great development.
or great development. And so you can either be part of making great development or not.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you all for coming. Like I said, we'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about regional transportation with Megan Owens, who is from Transportation Riders United. I hope you'll come and join us. And thanks for coming out. Feel free to send me an email if you have thoughts or opinions or whatever. It's jeff@concentratemedia.com. Thank you so much for coming.